presentation that Rob made, and you heard during the introduction of myself. I'm in Pennsylvania. I'm also a farmer. I'm not so much a commodity farmer as I am a specialty crop grower, and we use uh, cover crops pretty intensely. A lot of annual rye, and the devices, the rolling stalk choppers and whatnot. In fact, we used one of those, a formal one of those, for the first time last year. Up to that point, I've been using an old Brilliant Coldemulcher. So we love our cover crops on most days. Some days we hate them because they can complicate your life as you're trying to plant through really high residue. But I think the benefits far outweigh the challenges as you try to work with them. Um, so let me just to get started, and actually one other comment was, the things that Rob presented, some of the different aspects of I'll say advancing um, pieces of sustainability, whether it's to reduce erosion or capture nutrients. And you look at some of those, and I think even he said, some people will be like who would do that? Well, for we have to have folks like yourself kind of testing the limits on new applications of technology on the land, so that we have something to gravitate towards. This whole kind of concept of sustainability, probably among the best definitions that I see, is it's really a journey and an issue of continuous improvement. So so we have to have new tools and challenge ourselves to how we'll be able to get them on the kind of on the land. But this notion of sustainability, the idea is that we're going to be tasked in agriculture to do more with less, to produce more food with with shrinking resources, at best constant resources in some spaces, and that that we have to conserve. We have to conserve soil. Obviously, we have to work to increase productivity on the land, and and conserve resources. Some of the top line things we've seen quoted in the popular press about how much fresh water agriculture uses. Um, and what kinds of future demands there are going to be, not just agricultural demands, but demands from the rest of society, competing for these resources. So really, it's going to be agriculture's task to produce more food with less resources, as we move forward, and that is how we will be sustainable in the long run. If we will get that done. It's just that is the task, so to speak. Next slide. Kind of saying the same, but the idea being that where we are now, and this we is kind of a global context, but that we're using resources faster, yeah, than we can sustain in the long run. So we need to continue to be more efficient, and keep productivity moving forward, while at the same time um, uh, saving our soil, and uh, improving our soil, basically. So the idea being that we have to improve, or the situation will just not be sustainable. And again, sustainability in many contexts is being defined as continual improvement. So kind of going back to Rob's slides, what we used to do, like the idea of moving to a heavy emphasis on no-till with changes in climate, that just may not be enough. So the idea of filtering in some cover crops and other ways to manage crop production really may be what's necessary, just to do as good as we have done in the past. again to mitigate things like more severe weather as we move forward. Next slide. So I don't think that's a phased in slide. Click it twice if it is. There's another half to that slide. Oh, I see it. Okay. Um, if we think about some of the way different groups have defined sustainability or tried to tried to put it in a box, in the context of specialty agriculture, there's a lot more identity preservation. The crop is followed through the supply chain, and it's tracked more readily. So that changes things quite a bit about what you can and can't do. And in the context of some specialty agriculture, that's kind of meant that um, players within the supply chain have either defined what they want to consider what a sustainable um, production package would look like, and then make it happen, so to speak. That more of a prescriptive approach. Field to market for a lot of reasons, but one of the most important ones is we're talking about commodity agriculture. So in some ways we took on the hardest crops to to put together a sustainability approach, but also the most important. Those crops that cover the largest proportion of the kind of the footprint of agriculture in the U.S. So commodity crops, corn, soybeans, wheat, rice, cotton, potatoes. Actually, while they're not the largest acreage, that was more of a test, if you will, to kind of delve into the something that's close to a commodity, or pardon me, close to a specialty crop, but not too far away from the commodity crops that we started off with. So the the big difference being is that these are not identity preserved crops, and that we definitely have to take a different approach. And I can tell you, and we're wrestling with this, and I say we're meaning the supply chain, the players along the way are wrestling with the idea that they don't have perfect information about the crop, how it's grown on the farm, how it moves through the system, and and again, it's not an identity preserved crop, nor do we really think it should be. That it's a cost that we wouldn't want that burden on the marketplace. Um, so that's kind of where field to market came in. They saw the challenge. They wanted to go after commodity crops first, um, and work with that, because if you can make a difference on those crops that basically occupy the largest footprint in on the soil, then then you're really making a difference. So that's kind of the nature. Next slide. You could keep going. Next, yeah, there we go. So again, focuses on commodity crops. Another thing about field to market being different than some of the other approaches that are out there, um, is to be very outcomes based, and not prescriptive. Don't put a list of characteristics of how you farm, or to try to tell folks what is a recipe for sustainability, because one size doesn't fit all. And in fact, even within very specific geographies, the combination of management practices that create a sustainable outcome, if you will, for one grower, one corn grower, could be quite different than a corn grower in a similar geography that just has has different soils, different land lays quite different, or just some other feature of their management that again, one size doesn't fit all. So rather than to be prescriptive, we want to be very transparent, science based, and and really be more educational and informative. Show growers um, at the field level how changes in their management can impact their field print, or their impact on the resource base or the environment. But give them the ability to profile their own operation and then make their own kind of scenario comparison. And we, through the process of field of market, we've created what we'll call benchmarks along the way. But and benchmarks meaning your peers of corn production in Nebraska, if you will, or soybeans, at the county level, at the state level, and at the national level. But the reality is that the best benchmark you have is really to benchmark yourself, and over time look for improvement, and then also look for those management practices that fit your operation, and then how much difference can you make with them. So that's a lot of the tools that we're basically fundamentally working to provide to growers. Next slide. Something else that's very kind of special about field to market is really the breadth of those involved. And I've been involved in other endeavors, if you will, kind of like field to market. Probably never been involved in one that has so many folks at the table, or let's just say, and also the breadth of organizations. Um, Everybody from the grower, the supply chain, the end user, or by end user I mean the retail entity that sells food to consumers. That whole chain, the research, information chain, universities. It's very broad breadth. Kind of call it keeps us honest in a very kind of very positive way. That we have a balanced group at the table, really kind of, and within those groups, they send, what I'll say is, they send their A team, really good individuals to help guide us along the way into developing our approach, um, making sure that we stay focused, science based again, because then we don't argue if basically we're using the best science, and peer reviewed and so on. Next slide. Going kind of to that end, and hopefully you can see the list of folks on, or different entities, and that I think this is a complete list, but nonetheless, we've got grower organizations, we have large retailers, food manufacturers, NGOs, um, and a kind of a breadth of groups that don't always show up to the table at the same time, and sometimes they can even be, depending on the issue, might be on opposite sides of the fence. But in this context, really kind of there to create improvement. Not the only way to get something done is really kind of for everybody to work together, and that's what we really see within field to market. Next slide. So to kind of talk about some of the deliverables, if you will. I mean, and there's probably a lot of other smaller ones, but the big ones are, and I'm going to talk about them more specifically later in the presentation. But we provide the online grower tool, and that's something that Randy and has been involved in that, and it's continued to improve, and it in itself is a continuous improvement kind of piece, and that won't change anytime soon. It just gets better, easier for growers to use. That's the more intuitive, hopefully, um, and it allows growers to benchmark their fields. I mean, it is truly kind of field print, not farm print. So you put multiple fields in there. You can, outside of the tool, roll them up to a farm kind of picture. But the idea being is that the decisions are made at the field level. Um, whether you're going to put a cover crop on a field, whether you're going to change your irrigation strategy, and anything like that, kind of happens field by field, crop by crop. So that's the building block, and that's how we attack the kind of the online piece of it. Another outcome or deliverable is really to provide information and to create engagement with the supply chain. You know, they're tasked and being asked basically to prove that they are buying sustainable corn, soybean oil, whatever the case may be, cotton, and every day, kind of being asked to validate that, don't say it, prove it, kind of thing. So we're in the commodity context, we're trying to provide them with that, with that information, with the ability to document continuous improvement, and particularly kind of not pin one region, one crop against another, really to look at moving the needle of a given crop and the information you need to do that. And then I'm going to say lastly, but it actually was the first thing that we did at a large scale, and I was very heavily involved in it, but is a national indicators report, which is basically, okay, step away from the field and take a little bit of a different approach and use high level government data, USDA, NAS, census data, data at a very landscape level, looking at what's happening on the land. And interestingly, because of some of the information we can get out of government data, we can paint the picture of kind of all of soybean production in the U.S., all of corn production, including changes in to the extent that there's been any geographic changes over time. The National Indicators Report is very much about trends over the long run, to see the impacts of significant changes in the Conservation Reserve Program and things like that. Those impacts show up, and they really paint a very positive picture for agriculture. It is kind of interesting because some of the other tools, particularly like say the field print calculator, when you're a grower and you've got just a couple years of data in the tool, sometimes it's a little bit hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and that's a challenge, and we worry about that continuously. But one of the carrots, if you will, especially in a kind of a broader context, is when you look at the National Indicators Report and see the story that agriculture has. They don't have anything to be, they don't need to hide from their past, so to speak. They've made dramatic improvements in pretty much all spaces or all of our indicators. But then the next question does become is how do we keep that moving forward? And that's a lot of what the other parts of Field to Market are about. Is fine. We've seen improvement. We can document it. How do we make sure that 10 years from now we're putting another very positive notch on our belt? And that's a lot of what we're tasked with at this point. Next slide. Okay, so to look at again the one of the specific areas, the field print calculator. That's a lot of really what Randy and the folks that we worked with in Crete, Nebraska. We were working with the calculator and what we would call a pilot community. So we recruited growers. Nebraska, I have to say, we had incredible help, incredible support from local extension, conservation folks, growers, and commitment to get the data collected. In fact, really the work that we did in Crete, Nebraska preceded the current generation of the online tool. Basically, we went out with a paper survey to collect the data so that we would know how we needed to build the tool. Just a little bit of background. So you guys have a special place, in our hearts and in our process for sure. Next slide. So I think Randy mentioned briefly the metrics or the dimensions that we measure. Land use, which is really kind of just a productivity measure, kind of the inverse of yield. A little more to that, and it kind of thinking or reflecting back on the previous presentation where say corn farmers may now have a second economic crop by pulling off corn corn stalks for biofuels or cellulosic fuels. When those types of co-product situations occur, our tool provides for that, gives credit. And I think it was alluded to that while they're very positive in some senses, but they come with costs. Whether you're pulling certain nutrients, that won't be recycled back, carbon, obviously. So our tool at least makes attempts at that, basically through how we use Russell 2 and the soil conditioning index, basically to look at changes in carbon, but at the same time takes into account the economic side of having a co-product or a second crop. Similarly, harvesting straw behind wheat, or in the case of cotton, it's a little different because we've got cotton seed as a co-product that is unavoidable, and very valuable. So we're accounting for that. Our soil conservation metric, basically what we're doing is we're looking at soil erosion. When we first did the work in Crete, it was Russell 2 for water erosion, and that is the vast majority of the erosion. We've since brought online the wind erosion component of the bundle, if you will. And so when we move further west and get into where wind erosion is pretty important, we have the ability to tap in. In fact, the model taps into both Russell 2 and WEPS, the wind erosion system. Kind of another thing, and probably I would imagine some folks in the room, I'm not looking at you guys, at least not directly, but if you've ever used Russell 2 at your local conservation office or whatnot, and I know I have, it's not something that a grower was just going to be able to roll his sleeves up and get something valuable out of. What we've worked to do through working with NRCS and their version of Russell 2 in the cloud, and kind of contemplating moving to a next generation, if you will, which will be even better. But where we are right now, it does bring kind of Russell 2 to the farmer. It has certain constraints about how much input data you really can put into it, but it's a real strong first pass at bringing Russell 2 to the farmer, as opposed to being something that you just can't run on your own. So that was a big task that we did. With that, we use the soil conditioning index as an indicator of change in soil organic matter or carbon. If you were doing measurement of your own on the farm, that probably would be better. But within the tool, this is something that we do have the ability, just kind of give a directional indicator and some confidence level about whether you're building soil organic matter or depleting it. Water use, and that should be probably more clearly stated as irrigation water use, and obviously Nebraska is a great place to kind of talk about that with the significance of irrigation. So we're looking at irrigation water use and the efficiency, not just the absolute amount of water that's going out in the context of an irrigated field, but the impact of that water in terms of change in crop production. So we're looking at basically the marginal increase versus the water used. Energy and greenhouse gases. So we're measuring, and we're going to show growers basically not just their direct energy. I mean, when you talk to a lot of farmers, about the energy they use. I mean, the most oftentimes the first thing that'll come to mind is when they're putting diesel in a tractor, fuel tank, and whatnot. And obviously that's important. But depending on which crop we're talking about, the relative importance of that is considerably different. If we're talking about corn, the nitrogen that we use is dramatically more important than the fuel we burn to produce it. If we're talking about soybeans, well, then the balance is probably a little bit closer with the fuel you use versus the crop chemicals and the fertilizer, with the idea being you're not probably putting much nitrogen on your soybeans typically. So other metrics that we've added since we originally did the work at Crete is a water quality, and that's a surface water quality, basically a runoff metric, dealing with a lot of information about surface cover, residue on the surface. So it's highly correlated with, even with soil conservation, obviously. And then coming down the road is a kind of a biodiversity measure to look at impacts on wildlife, so to speak. But it's within the production area, not all the non-production area. So that you only have so much control over your biodiversity with in field, so to speak, but and edge of field, I should say. But that's where we're headed. Next slide. And I'm hoping this is a little bit bigger on your screen than it is on mine. But just to give an idea what growers, and I kind of talk through most of this on what growers will have to do when you get into the tool. This is kind of the first screen you're going to see. You're going to be asked to name the field and then identify it. What we've provided for is if you have 3 decimal Latin long coordinates, like off of a grid soil map or some kind of a soil map, that will help growers immensely. It will put them right on their field, actually. But so they're gonna highlight the area of the field, whether it's a pivot or some other kind of a field, and then by doing that, the tool's going to go to a central database, basically, grab the soil characteristics, the slope, and so on, that it can get that would be in a generic database, so the grower doesn't have to provide that information. Um, then what else we need from the grower are their production practices. Basically, how they're tilling the ground, if they're tilling, what fertilizer they're putting on, meaning amounts of NP and K, their crop chemicals, and not brands, but basically how many herbicide treatments you're putting out, how many insecticide, fungicide, um, what are your tillage practices? Need to know what your yield is, because so much of what we do in the field print calculator is really on an output basis. So it's per unit of output, generally, not everything, but but most of the efficiency that we look at is how much input or impact on the resource base does it take to create a bushel of corn, or 100 weight of rice, or a pound of cotton or whatnot. So most of the indicators are at that level. So basically, you're going to provide the information by way of this input screen, about yield, about production practices, and your input use, whether you're drying, if you're irrigating, how much water you're putting on, um, things like that. Next screen.
Stewart, Stewart, this is Randy. We're going to have to wrap up in a few minutes, and we're going to take a little break. So if we can get
Okay.
to some conclusions here towards the
Okay,
end.
I'll try to. In fact, maybe I can wrap up with the next slide. Okay, and that's what I'll do. So once you've populated that data, the grower will see a graphic representation of uh, their performance, if you will, on against the peers that I originally mentioned, like national, state, county. And if you're part of a pilot group, like the Crete growers were, they can actually pick their own pilot community once that their data is in, so they can look at a smaller subset. Um, the radar diagram or spider diagram kind of shows them in all the dimensions on one screen, and it's one of those kind of golf score kind of things. Less is more, less is better. So as you can shrink your footprint. um, so this is one of the screens. The grower would also have a screen for each of the metrics to do scenarios, so they could modify their production practices in a kind of what if context and look at their impact. And then in the context of like what we did with the Crete, Nebraska pilot, the growers gave us permission to analyze their data, and that's just from a privacy standpoint. When you first go on the tool, and any one of you in the room could go on the tool right now, grab a field if you have that you farm, or even a hypothetical field, and populate it. Your data is your data and your data only at that point. If you're part of a pilot group and you permission different pieces of your data to that pilot group, well then, then whoever the administrator, whether it's somebody at field of market doing work, or or one of the food supply companies, and you would know who that is, obviously, because you've opted in, so to speak. Then they would be able to dump your detailed data out, and and do further analysis, maybe look at trends and whatnot. Actually, do go to one next slide, I think, because there should be a really good example. Okay, and now we'll stop at this. Just kind of an aha, if you will, and or half of an aha on this slide. Looking at this is the Crete, Nebraska data for irrigated corn production. This is just the 2009. If you could look at it, and a potential takeaway would be that really the energy associated with pumping water was the biggest differential between um, growers that used a fairly minimal amount of energy versus a more significant amount of energy. There are differences elsewhere, but the water pumping. But then if you look at their yield, the yield is not that much different relative to the amount of energy they use, which would correlate directly with the amount of water they applied. But this is a 1 year context, so we can't say too much from a 1 year context about whether folks on the right hand side of this curve continuously pump a lot of water and don't seem to have a very strong positive impact on yield. You can't say that just with 1 year data. They may have pumped that water because they had to just to sustain that yield. But if we 3 years of data, 4 years of data, and that's where we are now, is more of the 4 years of data and needing to do that analysis. And if those same growers are in the same place, well, then we could step back and maybe think about water use efficiency, which would affect their energy. And so that's kind of where we are now, is being right about where we have enough years of data that we could start looking and saying this is more than a 1 year phenomena, and maybe there's some management changes, and that's another reason why folks like yourself, kind of that are feet on the ground, closer to growers, and can be in a much better position to look at things like this and say there is something that could change here, or potentially change here. So that's about where we are, is to want to start being able to help growers think about those kinds of possibilities. Sorry.
The question, Stewart, was
Um,
what about people that have integrated farms with livestock?
right.
With the field.
And right now, we don't do a what do you want to say, a profile where where we would look at the whole system. So what the best that we can do is you kind of make a dividing point of where, say, the manure is leaves the livestock entity and becomes part of the cropping system. And I know you will, you kind of think, like, well, so where's that divide happen? But that's the way, I know in the East Coast here, in the Chesapeake, we can make that division pretty clear with poultry operations. In fact, almost we're doing a legal handoff between the cropping part of the farm and the livestock part of the farm. I know DMI, the dairy folks, they have done a lot of the same kind of things, but obviously they've done it in a system context because they're worried about a gallon or 100 weight of fluid milk. But what we've done right now, it's crop specific, so we're not doing livestock yet. We can handle manure, and we can put the appropriate impacts in there, but it's really the impact relative to what part the crop owns, so to speak.
One of my thoughts is a potential of a Nebraska extension pilot instead of a Crete mill pilot, where we would possibly work with growers individually, say a goal of 5 or 10 for crop educators across the state. With this new water quality index and fingers being pointed at us at the Gulf, eventually Nebraska will be pointing towards Nebraska. We would actually have data um, that is specific to fields across the state. We'd like comments and feedback about this tool if we were to launch something like this. Please send those comments to specialist educators, to Rick Kelsch, and copy myself. Bungie just announced they will fund a graduate student to help work with Stewart and crunch the data for the last 5 years at the mill and assimilate that into one educational piece there. And that just got confirmed this week with an email to Rick. Any other comments, Rick? Appreciate it, and thank you, Stewart, for giving that update.
Absolutely. Thank you, Randy.